Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Cannabis has a very special responsibility when it comes to social justice because cannabis has a very special history. To quote the Leafly report on social equity, seeds of change, strategies to create an equitable cannabis industry, it is disingenuous to legalize cannabis and pretend that people of all races enjoy access to the opportunity offered by this new industry. 8 decades of prohibition have burdened people of color with targeted targeted policing, arrests, and criminal records. In the present, venture capitalists and other investors who are overwhelmingly white often ignore or shun or dismiss pitches from entrepreneurs of color. To make progress in the future, we're going to have to examine where and how to do this better. No ifs, ands, or buts. And my guest today is a New York and California licensed attorney, and he is here to talk to me today about where the industry is going and when it comes to social equity. Josiah Young, welcome to Let's Be Blunt with Montel, sir.
Mr. Williams, thank you so much for having me on today. I want to especially start off by saying, salute to you as a legend for obviously your storied career in daytime television, but also your fight, dealing with your condition with MS and then the kind of becoming the face of that and, incorporating cannabis. I think you're very bold, very brave, and you're having very much needed conversations. I had the chance to check out a few of them. You're the man.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, look, let's start by telling some people a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up and where did you go to college?
Absolutely. I grew up outside of DC, born in New York, but kind of raised in Silver Spring, Maryland.
I'm a Baltimore boy.
A Baltimore boy, so we got Maryland in the building.
Yep.
Did my formative years there and went off to college. I graduated in college from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. So I had that experience of the Black college experience at our, storied dear old Morehouse. From there, I was back to DC for law school. And after law school, I, kind of made my way around the legal industry, working at a few law firms, gaining various experiences. And now I'm in private practice in my own shop based in Sacramento, California.
But now, what made you choose? You didn't start off in the legal profession working in cannabis. What made you decide to turn your attention to the cannabis industry?
It was a confluence of a lot of good things happening at one time. Cannabis is something that I've been familiar with all throughout that high school, college, and after college experience. In 2018, or I believe it was 2016, is when the voters of California decided, hey, you know what, we're going to start legalizing this thing. I was working in a law firm and they sat me down and they were like, as soon as the law passed, they were like, hey, would you like to start becoming an expert on this? Would you like to go and talk to some of our city clients? It was primarily a municipal firm, which is big to understand in the cannabis game. A lot of the action is happening at the local level. So I began getting my chops advising local cities and state counties about how to really regulate this program. From there, it brought me into helping private businesses figure out how to regulate it. And from there, I got involved in how do we help the minority community, this community that we're developing programs for and devoting our attention to. How do we help them into the industry?
And when you started looking at it from that perspective, some things were glaringly, jumped out at you, did it not?
Absolutely. They're still glaring at me on a day-to-day basis. So, it's been kind of an issue that we've seen since the development of recreational cannabis in California. When you look at New York, as you mentioned, where I'm also barred and licensed to practice, 50% of the licenses are supposed to go to these social equity applicants. In the legislation, in the drafted law that was written, it specifically says that to remedy the harms of the past, we've got to address these issues for the minority communities now. So it's something that is definitely getting the requisite attention, but the proof is always in the pudding, right? We have to see the rubber meet the road and see if there really are going to be benefits to these communities.
Well, let's jump aboard and take New York, for example. You just brought them up. So now, is New York working towards trying to ensure equitable participation?
Absolutely. And the concept is good. Let me say overall, if there was one takeaway I had, I think that the concept of social equity in the cannabis space or any other industries for that matter is a very valuable and a very positive step. But it's always going to, the devil's in the details, as they say. And we have to figure out how we can actually empower these people. And by these people, I mean these minority cannabis operators to be successful. And the other end of that token is you still have to balance it with just good old fashioned business, right? This is not a handout. You can't necessarily, how do you get venture capitalists to come in and give money and then not expect a relative rate on return on investment?
But then again, in some ways, I mean, in some of the programs like Florida and other places, they have written in their legislation equity programs, but that just means find a black person, put their name on the application when you submit it in, and we'll give them 5% and see you later. We'll take care of this. Right. So how do we actually approach this from the standpoint of understanding that equity in itself is good for the business? Good for the
Yeah, well,
industry.
a lot of times it's highly predatory when you're talking about that. You find somebody who checks the boxes, find somebody who's from the right neighborhood, find somebody who has been arrested for cannabis but is still eligible for a license, and then we'll throw them their 5% and get them out of the way. And it's very predatory in that way. So one of the ways that we can continue to help those communities is to advocate for overall settling of the regulations in the industry, right? To be fair to all players at the table, this is a brand new nascent industry. There's a long history of criminalization. There's a long history of law enforcement finding ways to arrest people and criminalize cannabis. It's a very new history, very recent history in terms of giving these people the opportunity to participate in the industry. So we do have to continue to allow the industry and the regulations to settle. For example, in New York, they haven't even issued the substantive regulations, right? The state has passed the law. Cannabis is legal as of today. How do you get those licenses? How are those social equity applicants going to be prioritized? The answer is to be determined. So as we're having these conversations determining it, it's people like you who are championing these issues. It's me and my advocacy work, but it's also the will of the people. We have to continue to tell our legislators and our regulators what's important here. And if social justice is the issue, we have to make it clear that there are still challenges to entering this industry.
I kind of find it crazy that some of these legislators and administrators who are looking at programs trying to develop initiatives to make sure that there is a equitable pathway forward don't even understand the history of what they're involved in. I mean, when you speak to a legislator, I mean, I have very, very interesting. I testified before a judge in state recently because of some issues that were going on with an application that was submitted. The application was submitted, and literally these guys achieved one of the highest grade scores for their application, and there was no reason why they were not given a license other than the fact that the organization granting the licenses thought, this can't be true. Why? Because on the application, they had like 14 different African American business representatives in the community that were on this one application. The guy was going, I just don't believe it. And it's like, why? So we ended up going into court, sitting down and talking to the judge. And while I was, testifying for the judge, I brought up, in my conversations, I said, he asked me a question. One of the people asked me, well, Mr. Williams, why are you so interested in this industry? And I said, well, I'm so interested in cannabis the same way the federal government has been. The U.S. government has a patent on cannabis that they issued themselves back in 2002. And the judge stopped the conversation and said, wait, excuse me? And I said, yes, sir, Judge. It's the patent number 6603507 that has been on the book since 2002. And he literally typed away his computer at his judge's stand and went, oh, I didn't know that. He'd say those words, but he didn't know that. And I'm thinking to myself, now, how the hell can you adjudicate anything with cannabis if you don't even know cannabis's history?
Mm-hmm. And you see that pervasively, and part of it is because of the black market history of cannabis, right? You mentioned there's a long history in America of criminalizing it since the 1937
Right.
Marijuana Taxation Act, since the 70s and 80s when they started to further criminalize cannabis and really kind of lock in and assess these penalties for it. So yeah, there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of stigma, and that's a lot of the work that we have to do too, is just to continue to destigmatize it, right? As we see these major states and kind of bellwethers for the United States, like New York and California, enter the regulatory market and the recreational market, you're going to slowly see a reduction in that stigma. But that's part of it, is like judges, why would they know about cannabis? All they know is how to lock people up for it, essentially. And that's an overbroad statement.
But I mean, when you just said we're going to see the destigmatization of it as we see more adult use laws passed, but I don't know if that's absolutely true, to be honest with you, because what's happened is I think this industry has done itself a disservice. I mean, when it was time, and there's still time for us to do as much as we can do to educate the masses, we're too busy trying to figure out how to make more money than actually trying to perpetuate the industry. And you do so through education. I mean, you take a look at the pharmaceutical industry. They're not crazy. Why do we turn on your television and you see advertisements all day long? Now, of course, certain states legislated you don't have the ability to advertise product, but nothing is out there that stops or condemns you from doing documentaries, doing infomercials, doing PBS specials about the validity and efficaciousness of a plant that you could use that to educate the consumer and then have the consumer be the one that goes to the doctor and requests, why don't you know more information about this? That's what the pharmaceutical industry has done for the last 30 years. They throw out a drug, shove it down your throat 10 times a day, hoping that the patient will go to the doctor and say, what is this? And the doctor says, oh, I just had a representative come by and had it right here, hand it to you. Why? Because homeboy's making a piece.
Oh, for sure.
But we don't, in this industry, aren't really doing our part and even trying to copycat that. And that's what I think we need to do, because that's what I mean. I think that's one of the biggest issues with the cannabis industry today is education, education, education.
Education is the key for all things, right? It's a platform on which we can build and create a future, a better industry. But I'll also tell you that the lack of education, and that's still prevalent stigmatization, as you just mentioned, is being exacerbated by the fact that there's a lot of disconnect even in the legalization movement, right? So, for example, taxes. The federal government is also collecting taxes from all cannabis operators, right? The IRS has rules that say even if you're doing a legal business, you still have to pay your taxes, right? When you're bringing up lawsuits that are always happening in the cannabis industry now, if you go into federal court, it becomes a question: Can you do you have a property right? Do you have an interest in cannabis before a federal court? You certainly can't go to the bank with it, right? So there's all these different intersections, state to state. What are the laws in Texas as they differ from the laws in Florida, as they differ from the laws in California? Cannabis is still a Schedule One drug federally, and people have been calling for deschedulization for years and years. So there's an intense disconnect in the way all of these circles work. And at the bottom of the heap are, the black and brown people who have criminal charges for dime bags and the like, over the last 20 years.
And well, yeah, well, 20 years last, 80
Right.
years since
Correct.
it was first decriminalized. We looked at the entire incarceration rate, and I remember seeing a number once that said that close to 75 to 80% of all people arrested for cannabis were people of color.
Correct. Six to
That's not
10
something
times
that
more
that's
likely.
That's not something that just happenstance. That's something that was done deliberately. Why? Because cannabis was, brought into prohibition when alcohol made its way out of prohibition, because Anslinger lost his job as a prohibitionist for alcohol, decided to jump on the cannabis, even though while he was a prohibitionist for alcohol, he talked about the benefits of cannabis. A lot of people don't know that about Anslinger.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the anecdote you shared is interesting, but that's one of the things that also is not being appropriately studied. And I'm sure you can appreciate this with your scientific and medical background, as you've been dealing with things through your life. But realistically, we can't even get good studies on, clinical trials on the effectiveness of cannabis because of the federal guidelines, because of the federal
Here in the
program.
United States, yet we flip the coin and fund research in Israel and other places,
Correct.
doing
Correct.
the research that we should have been doing here,
That's right.
right?
Very,
Yeah,
very much.
I find. I mean, let's talk a little bit more about just the whole idea of social equity. What do you think that means to you? Just I'd love to hear your explanation or your definition of it. Because
Absolutely. Well, social equity is basically the pursuit of justice via the regulated cannabis industry, right? The purpose is to remedy the harms that have, number one, been acknowledged, which again, in the short shrift, if I gave it an overall sentence, is social equity good? Yes. Is it good enough? Not yet. But it is good that they're acknowledging the fact that these communities, and by them I mean our federal government, the regulators, are acknowledging that there have been harms done to certain communities, right? There have been families torn apart, people incarcerated, lives ruined over nonviolent cannabis possession charges. So we are in a moment of reckoning. We're acknowledging, that's probably not right. But as you said in your opening monologue, the majority of the industry is still by and large white. I mean, I was able to see one of the social equity applicants, one of the first operators in Oakland who was on your show. And there are examples of people who are able to make it through. But what social equity is supposed to do is give a leg up to those people who have been suppressed by the industry. And I'm not sure if we're yet giving a leg up. Certain places they give priority processing, they give limited access to capital. But even in the way a lot of these legislative deals are structured, or that the cannabis applicant can't give away enough equity to really get an attractive investment. So you're going to continue to see undercapitalization in social equity until we can figure out how to regulate and allow these people to get the money that they need.
Leafly magazine, or Leafly website, recently put out their equity score, and they base social equity on 8 points. I'm going to go through these with you. 1, mandate automatic expungement of cannabis records. 2, establish equitable cannabis licensing systems. 3, safeguard the rights and access of medical patients. 4, allow home growing and regulate it reasonably. 5, dedicate cannabis tax revenue to healing, not harm. 6, gather a robust data and share it widely. 7, reduce stigma through proactive programs. And 8, support cannabis career development opportunities. They then looked at all of the states, and they've come up with scores for every state as to how they are participating in social equity programs. And you got states like Nevada that they have rated at the bottom of the list. Alaska, Maine, Montana, South Dakota, I'm sorry, the bottom of the list. Michigan is close to the bottom of the list. Nevada is right up from the bottom. And then they put states like Colorado and New York at the pretty high up, close to the top. Colorado, California, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, New Mexico. What do you think about the way they've broken this out? That think that these are the tenets that you need to at least address when it comes to social equity?
Yeah, I mean, I can't challenge progress, and I think that those 8 points are an effective gauge. I don't know if it's comprehensive. I don't know if that's the entire picture, and I think part of the process has to be an iterative process. We have to continue to evaluate the guides posts that we're looking to, the goalposts. And if the goalpost has to
Right.
move, we've got to stretch it out further. But expungement and the decriminalization is priority number one. It makes no sense to have people making millions hand over fist in stores that look like the Apple store when there are literally still people in this country rotting in jail for the smallest SKU on the business's sales table, right? So people
Right.
still in jail for small possessory amounts.
Yeah, there are people in jail right now for having 3 ounces, and right down the street, you got stores that have tons, or at
Pounds,
least
and literally making legitimate money, paying tax, not even just paying taxes on the federal taxes, paying state taxes, getting the benefits. These are like legit businesses at this point, and you still have
yeah,
people arrested.
I find it absolutely ridiculous that
It's
any
egregious.
state that has passed legislation does not allow for those businesses to bank within their state. I just can't figure it out. I know it's controlled by the Fed, so
Federal
therefore they
banking.
should just open up a process and said, well, then all of our state-run, smaller banks or state-run credit unions should be able to allow for banking. I mean, just that keeps the money from being buried in the desert.
Right. But it's still murky water, though. I mean, the bottom line is it's still federally illegal. So even if you're able to find a local bank or a local credit union or somebody who will take you, eventually, I've seen it happen just numerous times. People end up getting caught up in the system, and then they're like, "Hey, you need to come pick your money up. We're no longer banking you," because the bank doesn't want to lose their charter from the feds when they find out, or from the FDIC when they find out you're doing cannabis activity. So that's still a huge problem. But in terms of the tax, you mentioned another point. I think the fifth pillar of that premise was that you have to tax to promote healing and not to promote further harm. And that kind of can go to like that question you asked about the expungement. Like, how do you do this? It takes resources to do that, right? Individually, if people want to get an expungement, they often call a lawyer, and they got to pay a couple $100 or something to get a lawyer to do that. If you're going to have the district attorney kind of do a fell swoop and handle all that, there's a lot of paperwork to process. There are revenues available from cannabis, but the fight is over, well, where does this money go? Are you putting it into education programs? Are you putting it into programs to protect the youth from overexposure to cannabis? Some of those are stated goals, but a lot of times you're seeing that money go right back into law enforcement. And that's a critical question that we've been having, ostensibly forever, but at least since 2020 with the George Floyd situation, and people have been calling for defund the police and et cetera. But if you really take note, and specifically in California, a lot of the revenues are going back to the law enforcement for enforcement, right? So is that like perpetuating the cycle that we've been through, or is this helping us forge a new way forward? I venture it's a little bit of both, and we need to figure out a way to make sure that if we're going to really prioritize social equity, we're doing it in a meaningful and in an earnest way. It can't be disingenuous. It can't be just to check the box, because these
Right.
are
I
real
mean,
lives.
you're right where the rubber meets the road in these conversations. What do you think about the Fed? I mean, what do you think? I mean, I personally think, there were a lot of people who were hoodwinked into believing that this particular administration was going to do a damn thing for anybody. First off, you got the president who still thinks cannabis is a gateway drug, and you got the vice president who made sure that more people were arrested under her tutelage as attorney general in California for, you know, minor cannabis violations across the state. And though even when she was running, she was trying to, act cute and say, well, I've smoked before, all this kind of
I
stuff,
remember that. Yeah.
and then turn right around and hasn't done anything or made or kept good on the promises that they made while running. Because if you remember, they both said they were going to do something in the first 100 days. Well, 100 days is come and gone. And I know that this administration, I get it. I'm looking at the TV today and I saw, the congressional hearings and senatorial hearing on Afghanistan. But, and we can argue about that for days because I mean, I got military background, but I mean, it blows my mind that all of a sudden we give a damn about something that's been going on for 20 years. But let's skip that. It's the same thing right now. For us to think that after they lie to you and make a promise, they really give a damn about something that's been going on now for 80 years. Hard for me to think. What do you think about the Fed? What do you think they're going to do?
That is the rubber meeting the road in terms of this. And I'll tell you, first of all, I'll hedge just a bit by saying, cannabis is inherently political too. On that local level, you're gonna have to be connected with the right politics. And so, because I'm helping people, I don't want to, opine too bad or say how I feel about what the federal administration is doing. What I will say is, there has to be a change. I've had some cannabis mentors, people who've been practicing cannabis law, for years, 20 years. They said, oh, we thought 20 years ago that they were going to deschedule. So I think that it's a proliferated thing. I keep constantly, they're getting promises like, oh, we're going to fix this, we're going to handle this. Why they haven't handled it, I have no idea, but I think we need to continue to put pressure on them. I think people like you, again, championing this issue, going and testifying before the judge. We also need to tell our legislators. We also need to write to the administration and say, hey, this is a priority issue for us. You guys promised, you have to deliver on your promise. And we do need federal deschedulization. That's needed to get tax relief. Cannabis taxes are called like basically gross taxes. You're not getting normal and ordinary business deductions. You're not able to deduct the cost of your vehicles. You're not able to deduct the cost of your staff and their salaries, right? So that's
Or your build out or any of that stuff.
None of that stuff, right? You're not getting the benefit of banking with security. So that is a security threat, number one, if you're sitting with all this cash that you're trying to bury. But number two, it just makes the business harder. So federal regulation has to happen. But I would imagine another thing about cannabis is the interstate commerce. That's where you go Fed's problem 101. Anybody shipping it out of state, right? Like the guys in California sending that Cali weed wherever. That's where you're going to get federal charges, right? And people are going to be arrested. Well, what about these big commercial operators? Those retailers in New York, they want to get access to the top California marijuana, cannabis. They can't because it's federally legal. So that has to be reconciled. Especially,
I find it just absolutely so disingenuous when you like the state of New York. It starts it passes a bill. Where do they think the seeds are going to come from?
Where are you going to get it? Going to New York?
Yeah, exactly. They got to come in the country.
Exactly.
We just let that go, right?
Well, we don't be right, exactly. But we're glad to see the incremental movement. As I said, at the end of the day, I don't want to. There's two things I don't want to do. I don't want to down and say it's an impossible thing for the minority, community to get into, because it's not. There are ways we can get into this. And number two, I don't want to say, oh, it's impossible challenges. These are just things we have to reconcile.
And looking at that, well, what do you think what out of the states and out of the programs that you have seen in place, what programs do you think are working and why are they working, and which ones do you think aren't working?
That's a really good question. Well, number one, I will say despite the noble intention of the social equity program, I don't think that's working yet, right? Because it's this balance of, are you giving the community a handout for nothing in terms of the economics? Well, that doesn't make sense to anyone. But on the other hand, are you really giving them an opportunity? Are we equalizing the playing field? No, the playing field is not equal by any stretch of the imagination. So, to balance that out, on balance, I'm not exactly sure which states are doing it right, but I know for example, in California, it's a local driven thing. So Oakland has its own program, Los Angeles has its own program. Los Angeles is a gridlocked mess, right? Sacramento, where I'm based, it has a program. They have 30 retail licenses available in Sacramento, right? There were some rumblings and problems. There was a moratorium basically. After 30, no more dispensaries allowed. Well, then they did the social equity program, and they're like, well, what about all the social equity folks? So then they gave a wave of 10 more licenses. So 10 of those licenses went to the African American, or pardon me, the minority community, right? The community that had been harmed. Have those 10 come online? Are they successful? No, not to my knowledge, right? So
Because they didn't have access to funding, they don't have access to
it
investment.
doesn't work like that. Exactly.
Right.
And even as I said, even when you're trying to make the access to funding, there are restrictions on the licensing and the transferring of the licensing, whereby you can't really get the type of funding that you want to come in, even if you found the right investor.
That's really absolutely incredible. Just kind of crazy to me. I don't know. I mean, crystal ball me. Tell me what you think's going to happen in the next year, next 2 years.
Crystal ball, we're going to see more states come online. We're going to see New York really blow it up super big and drive a lot of the commerce and a lot of the revenue. I think that the social equity community is going to continue to galvanize. We're going to continue to beat the drum and say that we need actual substantive resources, and we're going to have more conversations like this. And ultimately, there will be a pathway forward for minority businesses to come in, but I doubt that it'll be before, in classic United States of America style, there's not a long head start from some other folks.
I mean, you take a look at how divided this country is right now. Especially when it comes to issues it just for issues of equity, period, in
Yeah,
anything, not just cannabis,
correct.
anything. What a lot of people, fail to talk about and don't want to talk about it. I don't like to bring it up either, but there were not rumors, but there was truth behind the fact that those insurrectionists that invaded the Capitol, there was quite a bit of cannabis being smoked inside that building during the January 6th, quite a bit. And
Never haven't heard it 100%. Don't doubt it at all.
I heard it, and I got to tell you, when you were looking at some of those videos, you could kind of see. Didn't look like people were smoking cigarettes pushing around in there. It looked like there was clouds of smoke in various places and there were some people who went up online and tried to, make a big deal about the fact that they got to smoke inside of the Capitol. But I'm not throwing this out as a race thing, but let's look back at those insurrectionists that ran through the Capitol, the majority of whom were not minority.
Yes.
So this is a side of the country or a group of people who hate America the way it is now, yet they like cannabis
Right.
enough to be able to smoke it and take a chance of doing so and getting arrested in the Capitol. It's just weird to me, man. I can't. I kind of juxtapose those things in my brain. I'm just trying to figure out, and then at the same time think to myself that some of those people who are in charge, why are some of these states so slow to right the wrongs of cannabis convictions? Because are they angry that if they right the wrongs, you're going to somehow let people of color off the hook?
I would think, though, I agree with that. I would think so. And the first thing I wanted to say is, before, even in the United States, there's been thousands of years of human therapeutic use of cannabis, right? So any type of, assumption like, oh, it's only the black and brown folks who are smoking the cannabis, or, in the past, oh, loco weed, that's absolutely incorrect. What I started to find out was, like, when I started getting some of these, rich white kids or something, they got all type of cannabis and been had it. So I think what you're seeing in terms of this, the left and the right, or whatever the divide, to agree with you and not highly politicizing it, but just looking at a conservative value versus a more liberal value. The conservative ideal seems to be that they don't, cannabis is improper and we don't want it, but really they want to be able to monopolize the market. That's what the
Cannabis was a conservative ideal in America. Look, every one of our
exactly.
forefathers grew it.
Exactly.
Mandated. It was mandated in the early colonies, to grow hemp and to grow cannabis. And those people weren't just growing hemp to make clothing; they were sitting on the back porch smoking, a little hemp to relax. So there was, and there's rumor, and I don't know whether or not we can get there's truth behind it or not truth behind it, but some slave owners who own those big, plots of land. How the hell do you think you got people to stand out in the hot sun all day long and pick some damn cotton
Yeah,
that's homeless?
right.
They were giving them cannabis. That was something that was done. They were, making sure that they had it. So, the plantation owners. So, I mean, let's not act like this is something that, I mean, first, the entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp
Hemp. Yeah.
uniforms. The entire George Washington's whole Mason camps, all the canvas that they used for their temps and their rituals that they used when they were, blowing incense. That wasn't nobody incense.
Hmm.
Let's get to fact, not fiction. I mean, that's part of what I talked about earlier when I was saying the education. We just seem to, not want to tell the truth. We don't want to tell the truth about our past anyway, but this is one of those
No.
things we really try to hide the truth on.
And Montel, I was able to watch the episode where you had the guest on talking about how to make $1 billion in the hemp industry as well. But what I think is super interesting about the hemp is now hemp has been again federally legalized, right? So since 2017, as long as you have the arbitrary number of 0.03 less THC in your product, you can you're supposed to be allowed to do interstate commerce and it's legal and all the like. I think that creates an interesting thing in cannabis, the THC kind, because also in my practice, I still see people get arrested for cannabis. I have numerous people in my office right now who, in the state of California where it's legal, either they had more than the legal possessory amount or they had this and that. But it really creates the question of, well, what is cannabis versus what is hemp? Have that. Do the police test it every time? Do they know what they're busting people for? They used to smell it and say, "Oh, now we come and get arrested." Well, it smells still probable cause because hemp smells just like THC cannabis. So how do
Correct.
you differentiate? So
And tell me that nose of that cop has been, validated and recognized as, you're going to tell me that this cop went and took a test and shows me that he can figure out between 0.03 and point, 04. Come on, I don't buy it.
No, it gives margins to squeeze black and brown or whoever they want, right? Again, let's not write the answer for them on the test if we're asking them the question. But I do see the black and brown communities get squeezed because of that. They come and they're grabbing stuff because it's just the old school method. It's like their amygdala is still stuck that if I see you with this flower, I'm gonna get you. Well, hemp is legal. You don't even know what this is.
Correct. Yep. 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 No, I'm with you 100%. And, I mean, as we see, I think one of the things that's going to kind of help turn this around a little bit maybe is all the international players that are coming to the table. I mean, right now you got China growing, millions of acres of hemp, trying to see what they can do. And I wouldn't trust any hemp coming out of China if you pay me. However, they're growing it. There's, I recently became a board member of a company out of Colombia, which is One World Pharma, owned by Isaiah Thomas. Um, and One World Pharma is right now publicly traded, along with a company that I'm getting involved with, not publicly traded, another one I'm getting involved with out of Africa, which is called Afro Helios, which is a U.S. company in Africa. The Colombian company has over 1 million hectares under contract, million hectares of property under contract that they can grow cannabis and hemp in. They've got one of the only vertical licenses in the entire country of Colombia that they own. So they have the ability to grow, process, and export. They can process, and they're exporting right now non-THC component parts. And in some countries that they are allowing, they're going to be exporting THC.
Wow.
That's the Colombian company, and there's an African company. I mean, but you see this sprouting up everywhere. I think that the competition of the international market's going to force America to make some very, very swift changes.
Especially as consumer demand increases in the United States. That's one thing I'm sure it's always been there, but now that we have, stores that can generate tax revenue and we can get credible data, I think all signs are pointing to an increase in use, or at least use that we know. So if you're going to be able to find high quality THC and CBD products that came from somewhere else, why not buy them? Which will put pressure on the United States market.
Well, and I think you nailed it. Over the course of the last year and a half, while we've been sitting around during this COVID, almost every state with a medical program has deemed cannabis an essential
Essential.
necessity. So therefore, that's what I find is absolutely ignorant. I mean, the fact that we can claim that it's essential, take the tax money out of it, but then try to do as much as we can to harm the industry. I just don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now, I mean, can you outline what you think some of our solutions could be?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, again, to be encouraging to minority operators or any operator. I've worked with minority operators and kind of these big, highly well capitalized companies. Number one thing is you have to have the right team around you. You have to have a good attorney. Frankly, it's such a fast moving industry. If you're going to be getting on the private side and even for the public side, right? If you're a city or a county or a new state that's coming online, you really need the right analysis around it. You need people from different perspectives to be able to share perspective. You need to have people with experience from other states. So just continued development of the industry through good professionals, good CPAs, good lawyers, etc. That's going to be important for those people who are operating. Also, I think that it's very important that we continue to put public pressure on the regulators to settle the market and pay attention to social equity, right? New York, for example, just coming online, obviously a big deal, does have a really good stated goal that 50% of their licenses are supposed to be for minority and women-owned enterprises, okay? But if it doesn't start working like that, we have to hold that accountable. Just to your point about, the current presidential administration, if they're not doing what they're saying, we got to say something about that, right? We can't kind of continue to let the status quo go on and kick our heels up and say, all right, well, at least they have these programs. So I think.
Well, look, I got to tell you something. If Trump allows Uday and Kusei to get into the business, and his two boys get into this business, all of a sudden he starts backing cannabis. I guarantee you that might be one of the things that puts his butt back in office.
Yeah, that's going to cause a lot of pressure, and especially if Joe Biden and Kamala can't answer. Like, I thought you said you were going to do it, right? So there has to be continuous community pressure. The investment money has to truly support the interest of the operators. There needs to be more opportunities. I hear African American community, or that I'm in touch with all the time, looking for those economic investment opportunities. So we need to be able to do more to pool people's resources, to let more people into the industry, more quality job training, as you talked about, because there's a lot of brothers who they would love to just work up in the store, black, brown, whoever, but give them an opportunity to become cultivators or distributors. And then I think the final piece, that we as a community can rally around is that education that you're talking about. More conversations like this, maybe going through the churches and explaining, the benefits of the industry and why we don't want to stigmatize it within our own community. But this education has to continue to happen. And in all fairness, the long history of cannabis, the regulated market is very, very new. So we have to understand that, and we have to continue to put the required attention to help it grow.
Are you aware of the fact? Do you know Reggie Noble is a Redman?
Oh yeah.
Are you aware that Redman just got federally sanctioned the National Cannabis Party? Do you know that?
I did not know that they had the national.
They just got a federally sanctioned National Cannabis Party. Just happened in the last month, and I definitely want to make sure that my office, when my Melanie, who reached out to you, she and I talk, I'm going to make sure she sends you an email to give you some information about it. But I definitely think that's something that I don't know if you're interested in helping them out as they move this initiative forward. But there will be now you have a national party that can be registrant in every state when it comes to any election. That party can be represented on the ballot and let people know that we are the people who represent cannabis around the country. Now we got to get this thing moving.
Well, first of all, Redman is the icon. So, I mean, just the idea that he's doing what he's doing and representing cannabis and has done it so well for so long, and really being the cool guy he is, that's number one. Number two, I'd be honored, Montel. Anything you want me to do, any connection we can draw, I'm all ears for it. So I'll be on the lookout for that. But yeah, that is the point. We have to continue to have the conversation. We have to have leaders who are stepping up and representing all sides of the industry.
Now, are you currently partnered with Matt Barnes on a project. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely, yeah. So Matt is a good friend. Started off as a client of mine in the cannabis space. He's really doing a lot of work in terms of supporting the initiatives of the social equity applicants. So, we have a few deals where we are working with social equity applicants on, kind of on the private side to bring investment to the table to help them get their stores and their opportunities online. And we're looking for more of that, right? Our goal is to continue to go locale to locale. We're starting in Northern California, but eventually opening up as a multi-state operator so that everywhere these businesses are coming online, they can get kind of that celebrity backing that's always important. That helps get eyes to your project, but also access to the capital. But at the really core of it, I'll say kudos to Matt. And obviously, what I do, the spirit of it has to be right too. You see so much predatory stuff in the industry, and I'm not claiming woe is me or we're the good guys, but I am simply saying, it's good to have somebody who really has the right spirit behind it and truly wants to see people succeed while all of us do well.
Well, I'll not only get you some information about the National Cannabis Party, but also about one of the projects I'm working on, because I just had a long conversation last night with the founder, and talking about trying to see if we could bring some more minority representation to the table with this particular company, which is getting ready to, I think, blow up. I really do. I really believe they're going to blow up really big worldwide, because we're working on not just cannabis hemp in the consumption way, but cannabis hemp has over 250 uses, and 200, no, 2,500 different uses, and there's so much that we can be doing right now that we're not doing. So I'm going to get you some information about that also, and see if you're interested in that. If there's any way somebody wanted to reach out to you, how did they get to you?
Absolutely. My website is josiahyounglaw.com. So you can email me at josiah@josiahyounglaw.com. Don't hesitate to, go to the website. My phone number is 916-706-0136. I'd love to have conversations about this all day. On Instagram, I'm Josiah Young Law, at Josiah Young Law.
Excellent, my friend. Great. I mean, that's really good. Now, thank you for being here and being a part of the show today, because I think it was really, really, very, very informative for lots of my listeners and viewers. And they're going to be psyched. You'll probably get a lot of them reaching out to you, asking for some help and asking what we can all do together. And I'll keep you in mind as we move forward. And if I see any places that synergistically I can put you together, I'd love to do that, my friend.
Such an honor. I really appreciate it. I hope that we can continue to educate and inform your audience. I again want to give you kudos for what you're doing now, today, and your history, all the way back to thank you for your service to this country. You really are a leader. You really got the right idea. You know what it is. So I'd be honored to team up with you and help out where I can.
Absolutely, sir. Well, I thank you so much, and I want to thank all of my viewers for tuning in today and listening to Josiah Young, and understanding that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. You need to not just sit back and rest on the fact that, let's say, an initiative was passed. Let's get out there and make sure these initiatives that were passed are at least implemented in some way that does justice not only to the industry but to all of those who want to participate. Josiah Young, thank you so much for being a part of Let's Be Blunt with Montel today, and thank you for tuning in. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.